My name is Larissa Kyzer, and I am here with Fríða Ísberg. I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and she's in Reykjavik.
I am an Icelandic author, author of 3 books, 2 poetry collections and 1 short story collection. I am in a poetry collective called Svikaskáld, and I make my living of writing, editing other works, and writing book reviews.
Wonderful. And so Svikaskáld means Impostor Poets, as you obviously know. But I was wondering if you could introduce the collective and just talk a little bit about how you work.
We met so Svikaskáld is a collective of 6 women. We met in the MFA program of creative writing in the University of Iceland. And in 2017, we were all about to graduate. And none of us had published a work. We were all pretty paralyzed with impostor syndrome and perfectionism, basically. Just we had been writing for years, and we were all like, I was the youngest, so I was like not very far up the ladder, but they were all pretty successful women, but still had this kind of issue of publishing fiction or poetry. And one day we decided to go to my family's summer house for a weekend, and we would have 2 days to write a poetry collection that we would publish together ourselves. And we decided that we would only have 1 month to publish the collection. And that was the only rules, basically. We had to publish something, and we had to say fuck you to perfectionism. And so we did. And we came together. We brought out like what we call like a springboard. Is that one poet starts with checking in and telling the others what kind of baggage she's brought to the table, like if she's tired, her kids are running her down, she's having a hard time at work or a really good time at work, like just how your energy levels are and what you've been thinking about, like topics that you've been thinking about. And then we write each in our own corner for 1 hour, and then we come together after that and we read what we just wrote. And then we allow each other to like take words or sentences from each other that we just heard and kind of put it into our next session of writing. So that's how we kind of work collaboratively, as we don't edit each other's poems, but in the end we just take 8 poems from the workshop that we did and put it in the book, and we see like that the book becomes that kind of discussion, and the poems are talking to each other because they're written in a conversation. So now we've published 3 books, and we plan on doing more.
I think it's such a way to work. It's collaborative, but it's also independent, and I like the idea of everything being in conversation but very spontaneously, and I think it's a really exciting way to work. And you actually wrote a manifesto on one of your retreats, which was published in LitHub last year, and translating this, it really resonated with me because of the anxieties that you were describing, and also just it's inspiring to hear about how supportive you are of one another, and this idea of just getting rid of the obsession with perfection. And so I want to just read a little bit out of your manifesto, if I may. The challenge we set for ourselves was to eliminate our fixation with perfection, like breaking up a bad relationship or quitting a draining job. And I think what's struck me since was that in both of those situations, quitting a job that you don't like or breaking up a relationship, you're leaving someone else. Whereas in this situation, you're talking about sort of stepping aside or stepping out away from this person that you are. And I think we often think about removing people from our lives that are bad influences or that aren't bringing out the best in us, but we don't actually think about doing that with ourselves as often.
Definitely. And it's just, I feel like of course, every writer, it's a job of a writer to edit and be self-criticizing. Critical of oneself. But that is usually more than enough. We usually have more than enough of that.
Yeah.
So what we really need is we need some counteracting to that. And a collective or like a group of other writers to like kind of say no to that or work as a counterbalance to that is just so valuable. And if there's one thing that I recommend as a writer, I recommend finding yourself a group like that. Because basically like the motto of the collective is never sorry. And when we're doubting, we have space to tell our doubts, and then it is kind of a rule to be honest, but to be supportive as well. So and it's just that makes the whole difference. Just getting confidence basically, and it's just that's the real value, is confidence. It's just when you know that you have like this strong team behind you, like you have a football team of female poets behind you, and you can just kind of what do you do when you're in football, like, with your American just
jump into each other's chests.
Yeah, exactly.
As a translator, at least, I know that I have benefited immensely from having not really a collective in a formal way, but finding community in like a literal sense. Like I joined the translation committee here in New York, and that was really powerful because it was not only a place where I could get advice and sort of guidance on how to enter my field, but it was really validating. People took me seriously, and I didn't have to do anything but show up and want to take part. It's been really important to me to try and find ways to bring more people into that. And I think you also write in your manifesto that you are looking to drag other women into the limelight with you, because there's always room for everyone. And a really good way to think about it, because I think that I think people within the same creative field are often feeling like they're in competition with one another, and that they have to space for themselves, and that they can't let anyone else in because that means that they won't be able to keep doing what they're doing. And there is actually room for all of us, because if we take up that space together, then suddenly we have more space and we don't have to just occupy this tiny little corner that no one's paying attention to. Another thing that this makes me think of is that, or something that I have been thinking about since we started talking about doing this chat, was that this sort of rejection of perfectionism, I think it really resonates with the current moment, because with basically the whole world under lockdown, we don't really have the option of obsessing over every last little detail. Like suddenly people are trying to make use of these imperfect platforms and do these very quick turnarounds with creative events. And there's so much creativity, I think, bubbling away just everywhere. But whereas I feel like in the States, at least, there's often this sense that you only get one chance to make it, basically. And if somebody gives you a book deal, for instance, and your debut book flops, then you're probably not going to get another chance. So people kind of obsess away in like that first novel or that first poetry collection or whatever it is. But now we don't have that option. And so I think if there was a good thing to come out of this, at least in terms of creative output, I think it would be great to see people really embracing the flaws and the rough edges. Because I think there's something wonderful about, like, you know, your kid running into your Zoom meeting and like asking where their toy is. There's something very spontaneous about that creativity, and I think if we all just sort of embrace that a little bit, it would lead to some really great art.
Yes, definitely. Just also embracing that everyone can participate, and like doing some craft or doing some art form is, you know, wholesomeness, and it's very, very rewarding in itself, and it doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to have another value, you know, than that.
Right. And you don't have to be the absolute best at it to be able to get something out of the act of doing it or to put something worthwhile out in the world. Would you like to read one of the poems that you wrote during one of your Svikaskáld workshops?
Yeah. Definitely. Last summer, we went to a paradise called Kláði, which is basically a flat island. And it is in the middle of an archipelago. Surrounded by like 300 other islands, and it's just, if you ever have a chance to go, then this is my recommendation of a honeymoon, basically. So this is from that collection. It's called Island. I once knew about birds. I have these memories of sitting in my father's arms, paging pre-literate through his bird guide. Meadow pipit, phalarope, eagle. But no roads lead to Rome from here. When you live on an island, all of your roads become lakes, flowing to Dýrafjörður. Likewise, understanding is not a winding road, but a river that eventually finds its way to the sea, away from forgetfulness. I feel it in my own dehydration. Soon all lakes will have dried. We will cluster on a skerry that floods at high tide, and as the sea gets close to your toes, two birds will take wing. For a split second, I'll remember their names, Clover and Wagtail. For a split second, I'll be able to tell them apart before forgetfulness opens its mouth and swallows.
Thank you.
There's just one, so the saying, all roads lead to Rome. So we have that saying in Icelandic from the Icelandic sagas, which is all waters flow to Dýrafjörður, basically.
I thought that was the connection, but I wasn't positive. So I'm appreciative that you confirmed that, because I actually looked up the and I was like, I don't understand why they all float there.
Yeah, exactly. But it's kind of, it's kind of, yeah, it's when you live on islands, the roads lead to the island, you know, there's nothing else.
Would you like to maybe switch gears just slightly and talk a little bit about your short story collection, which I should add was recently nominated for the Nordic Council Literature Prize, which is a really phenomenal big deal. So congratulations to you for that. So would you like to describe the collection a little bit?
Yes, I can. So Itch is a collection of 14 stories. And they, yeah, basically what glues them together is that the main characters itch from or for something simultaneously, usually. So it's usually something that's bad for them, but they want it. And it's just, yeah, it's kind of like, you know, when you scratch an itch, it feels good for a moment, but it's really bad for the, you know, for the long term. So that was kind of the metaphor that I was like halfway through writing it. I kind of put that as my yellow poster. You know, just every character has to have that feeling. So it's basically usually young people who are itching from ambition, the anxiety of making it, of heartbreak. The first story, the collection opens up with a story where it's parents that are stuck with a 27-year-old in their home and his girlfriend. So that's a pretty common that's a pretty common house here in Reykjavik, because after the tourist boom, after the crash, the rental market just completely skyrocketed, and just people under 30 could not afford to rent an apartment. So all of the 27-year-olds were just stuck with their parents at home. Yeah, it was a situation. It's been gradually getting better, but yeah.
It's a collection that feels very, when I read it, I feel very much like I'm in Reykjavik. Like it feels very rooted in that place and this time, and the sort of undercurrent of anxiety, I think, is quite resonant outside of Iceland. But reading it, I think you get like a really fabulous sense of where young people are in that city right now, which is really interesting because it's not necessarily explicit. It's just you really capture like a general ambiance in a way that, and frame of mind, I think, that is really illustrative, which is great. It's really, I think it's really unique.
Thank you, Larissa.
You're quite welcome. I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about the anxiety of making it. I think that's such a great term, and I think that it also really speaks to the story that you're going to read just a little bit of.
I mean, we've been having this discussion about Generation Y for like millennials, basically, for a while now, and I feel like all of the kids around me, and myself included, we've been like raised and bred from praises from our parents, and been like driven by the ambition that we inherited from them as well. My cat is climbing a really, really high tree right now. So I'm right here. Okay, I'm here. And she's only 10 months old. Okay. And so, yeah, so it's basically ambition has become an addiction like everything else. And success in that way is a high.
Mm-hmm.
And we're always chasing this high, kind of. And we want to, create value for ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
because our value is measured in success.
Mm-hmm.
And we are living in this capital, Reykjavik, which is ambitious like every other capital in the world. But instead of having like a normal distance in a capital like New York or London or Paris or whatever, we are stuck with each other, the 220,000 of us,
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a really small town, and everyone who's been to Reykjavik can affirm that. It's basically like a small town. So you're always just like completely just, the success of others is completely just shuffled like in your face all the time. And you're always kind of measuring your own value to others. And that, of course, just creates a hell of anxiety, And then that's really funny that when you experience like a minimum level of success, you get paid for your work, you can live of your art, then you just really see it for what it is, and it's that, it's just it's not a good goal in itself to be successful. It's just not.
I think something else that's sort of worth noting, or at least that seems worth noting to me, having lived in Reykjavik I lived there for almost exactly 5 years, is that there's this real weight of who you've been. So you grow up with the same friends, their parents all know you, your family, is all basically there. And so who you were is who you are today. And there's very little separation between that. And like, it's, it informs how people think of who you will be, in a way that I don't think is the same as when you have like a giant city where you have like New York, where you have people who are coming in and out all the time and are from different places, and they get a fresh slate. And, who I become in New York is completely separate from, who my cousin knew I was when I was 5. But I think that there is also sort of it can be really nice that people have seen you grow and change and become the person you are. But I think it also creates like a lot of pressure. And it makes it difficult to reinvent yourself.
Definitely. Wow, I've never thought about that in a way.
Well, with our last little bit of time, would you like to read a little bit from the beginning of profile?
Absolutely. Excuse my pronunciation again. Although I'm never sorry, of course. Cecilia looked unusually good today. She bent over the sink, put a tiny bit of soap on her index finger and sniffed. No, not too strong a scent. A sweet apple scent. She rubbed her hands under the water for a minute more while she turned her head from side to side and alternated between smiling and not smiling. A few locks of hair fell out of her bun. Her white sweater brought out the contrast between her eyes and hair and skin. The bathroom had good light. The mirror was square, and there was a little lamp in each corner like a makeup room in a theater. She shook her hands over the sink and stepped away from the mirror, reassuring herself that everything was okay. Marveled again at how good she looked today. Hesitated with her hand on the doorknob. Pulled her phone out of her pocket and looked at herself. The light was perfect for selfies. She hadn't meant to take so long. As she walked back to the table, she realized that they probably thought that she'd been pooping. They were laid back, their legs crossed at an angle, relaxed, elegant. Cecilia stood up straight and held her head a bit higher. The table was covered with mimosas of champagne glasses and half-finished cups of coffee after a morning meeting that had been rescheduled for the weekend. It was like a still life of success. When she'd been a waitress, she'd always lingered at tables like this. And now she was sitting at one. She sat in her chair and looked at her phone under the table. Saw that 6 people had liked her picture in 2 minutes. That was good. You could always tell in the first 15 minutes whether a photo would do well or not. If there were more likes than minutes, that was the measure. It had also been a good timing for a new profile. It wasn't even noon yet. The weekend. People had nothing better to do than check Facebook. The photo would hang there all day like wet laundry collecting sunshine. She put her phone in her pocket and decided not to look at it again for 2 hours. It was part of her therapy to try and forget when she'd posted something and let time pass. Then she'd have something to look forward to. The discussion at the table was no longer about work. The meeting was over. She tried to join the conversation. They were talking about some industry so-and-so she didn't know, and before long she started people watching out the window. One by one, people strolled past with bags from this shop or that. The post-Christmas sales were starting. She didn't want to leave, but she had to get keys to some friends of her parents before 1. The friends, a couple, were going to her family's cabin for a vacation. It was 12:30. Her new colleagues had ordered another round of mimosas and didn't look like they were going anywhere. It was a perfect opportunity to get to know them better, break the ice. Will you all be here for a while, you think? She asked the woman next to her, Margaret Mia, who went by Magga. She'd known who Magga was since she was a teenager, admired her and her designs from afar. What do people think? We'll be here for a while longer, right? Magga nodded encouragingly as she answered. Yeah, just drop us a line when you're done. Cecilia put on her new green coat. It was the most expensive piece of clothing she'd ever bought for herself. I'll be in touch later, she said to no one in particular, and walked toward the bar to pay, but then realized that the company would pick up the bill. She walked back past the table, feeling embarrassed. Thanks for coming on such short notice, Cecilia, called her boss. No problem, she answered, smiling again, and waved before heading out. She had to admit that she hadn't anticipated how differently people would pronounce her name when she changed the way she spelled it. Cecilia, with an I, with an E? No, with an I, yeah. Cecilia, with an I, instead of Cecilia, with a J. She just thought it looked better on paper, but now people stressed the Cece. Cecilia. When she spelled it Cecilia, people pronounced it Cecilia. It flowed better then. She was having a hard time getting used to it, although now at least she didn't have to share her name with 0.1% of the nation. Now she was only one of 13 people in Iceland with her name, instead of one of 310.
Thank you so much for chatting with me today. And I hope your cat made it out of the tree.
She did. Good. But thank you for a lovely conversation.
No problem.
Um,
All right, we will talk soon. Bye.